Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, June 9th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps and steps and steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, journalist Vincent Bevins and his book, The Jakarta Method, Washington's Anticommunist Crusade, and the mass murder program that shaped our world. Just thought we'd take a little escapism to go back into history from our current situation. But also on the program, 14 states and Puerto Rico hit record new COVID infections. Arizona in a medical state of emergency as they get close to running out of ICU beds. Joe Biden and D.C. Democrats reject defunding the police for now. And speaking of which, the Minneapolis Police Department admits they proactively slashed the tires of parked cars. Republican Senate says no corona bills until July as food banks have yet to receive their promised funds. Meanwhile, in the White House, Trump is freaking out over polls threatening to dump Jared. I wonder if that was that function of that Tucker Carlson clip we played recently. Meanwhile, the New York Times concedes that the Organization of American States study regarding Bolivia did in fact not support election fraud charges, which ultimately led to a coup. The Army in the U.S. reverses, may rename Confederate named bases after all. And lastly, you're headed to a national park this year. Congratulations. The Trump administration has made it much easier for you to kill bear and wolf cubs. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Glad you could make it today, as we all have. I hope everyone is staying safe. Obviously, new infections in 14 states around the country, including California and Texas. In terms of, I should say, not just new infections, but record-breaking infections. I think in Texas, they may have also the highest number of, a record number of hospitalized coronavirus patients. And that is, in many respects, some people say anyways, a better measure of what's going on the ground in terms of infections, because it essentially eliminates the apples and oranges comparison in terms of the quality of testing or the widespread availability of testing, et cetera, et cetera. So, that's that there. All right, let's get to this. The Democrats have said, for the most part, that they are not into defunding the police. I can't even quite make out exactly what Joe Biden's statement means, but it does appear, at least in his proposals in the past, it calls for more funding for the police. I've seen some people parse, that it's not necessarily to go directly to cops, but that's not really the point. The point is that we want to shrink the footprint of police as an institution in our communities. And apparently, and I was not aware of this, and I don't know when it started. Maybe it was in the air before yesterday afternoon, but we were talking on the program about the notion of defunding, and I think I made the point, so it's like a disinvestment. And apparently over the past 24 hours, there's been a lot of chitter chat on Twitter. I didn't catch up with any of that, that as to, is the messaging right on this, et cetera, et cetera. But let's keep in mind that in the course of 2 weeks, we have had more movement on at least this narrow aspect of criminal justice reform, and narrow, but it's obviously a huge part of it. I don't have so much the carceral state part of it, but in terms of policing, there has been, to my mind, the most amount of movement we've seen in this regard in I don't know, as long as I've been even remotely paying attention to any of this. So whatever's going on is being is so far been quite successful. Here's Meghan McCain coming out strong, or not, maybe not strong, against something that she has no idea what she's talking about. But here's Meghan McCain questioning Kamala Harris on The View. And, generally you should know what the question is that you're asking, I would say.
Substance abuse, so that we don't have to have a police response because we are smarter.
Senator, I hear you loud and clear, and I don't think there's any rational American right now who doesn't think that we need to take a cold, hard look at reforming our police. But there was a video that went viral over the weekend of the mayor of Minneapolis being yelled at, saying, yes or no question, are you for defunding the police? So I'm going to ask the same question the protesters asked him. Are you for defunding the police?
How are you defining defund the police?
Well, I'm not for anything remotely for that, so I would ask the protesters the same thing. But I assume I assume, and again, this is something that is new to me, I assume it's removing police, and as Congresswoman Ilhan Omar said, bringing in a whole new way of governing and law and order into a community. And my understanding, again, this is something that has just come into my understanding recently, is that you would not have police officers, like this Minneapolis city councilwoman said, that I would be a place of privilege if someone broke into my home and I wanted to call the police.
So, again, we need to reimagine how we are achieving public safety in America. And to have cities where 1/3 of their entire budget is going to policing, but yet there is a dire need in those same cities for mental health resources, for resources going into public schools, resources going into job training and job creation. Come on, we have to be honest about this, that there is actually not a consensus around this, because if there were, we would actually see smarter distribution of resources in our country to address the issues
Senator Harris,
that need to be addressed. Yes.
And Senator, this is Sunny, and I think just to add to the conversation, defunding
where is Meghan McCain just morphing into Sarah Palin? Could you just make out anything that she was talking about? She didn't know, she couldn't really express what she was talking about defunding. What is removing the police?
I think she was trying to swing it somewhere near Sharia law by bringing up Ilhan Omar, but couldn't quite get there.
I couldn't quite get. Let me just work in
my understanding here. My new understanding is this.
Yeah, just go back. Because I thought that was, and then we can jump back ahead to Sonny Hostin explaining it to Meghan McCain. But this really is pretty stunning. You have one of your hosts of an interview show, right? It's light. I get it, but they can't even string together a sentence about the premise of their question.
Who certainly has more producers than this show.
Oh, yeah.
Our police.
Sure.
But there was
I'm sorry.
Video that went viral over the weekend of the mayor of Minneapolis being yelled at saying, yes or no question, are you for defunding the police? So I'm going to ask the same question the protesters asked him. Are you for defunding the police?
How are you defining defund the police?
Well, I'm not for anything remotely for that, so I would ask the protesters the same thing. But I assume and again, this is something that is new to me, I assume it's removing police, and as Congresswoman Ilhan Omar said, bringing in a whole new way of governing and law and order into a community. And my understanding, again, this is something that has just come into my understanding recently, is that you would not have police officers like this Minneapolis City Councilwoman said, that I would be a place of privilege if someone broke into my home and I wanted to call the police.
I don't even know what that meant.
So,
frankly. But jump ahead to when Sunny Hostin jumps in, almost, I got to imagine she feels a little bit embarrassed. Like, I can't believe I'm on a show with this person.
I think just to add to the conversation, defunding the police doesn't mean abolishing the police. It means taking some of those funds that are typically 1/3 of the budget of a city and giving some of those funds to services like mental health and education and mental health resources. But I want to change the subject and ask another question. Joe Biden.
There you go. I'm sorry. That's her way of saying, like, I apologize for John McCain's daughter, but they had to hire her because she was John McCain's daughter, and Abby Huntsman was not available. So we had no one else we could hire on this TV show. There you go. Meghan McCain making a very, very strong case against nepotism in television work. Folks, before we go get to our guest, let me just remind you, one of our new sponsors and one of my daily uses now, Sunset Lake CBD. They are a farm in Vermont, just outside of Burlington. They used to produce milk for Ben & Jerry's ice cream. They decided to diversify a couple years ago. They grow hemp. It's 100% pesticide free. They only use organic fertilizers. They actually have third-party tests results for all of their products at sunsetlakecbd.com. You can check on the website. I've looked at them. To be honest with you, I'm not 100% sure I know what I'm looking at, but they seem impressive. Never even occurred to me to have that level of certification. They're a great company. $15 minimum wage. They're the employees own a majority of the company, and they have a whole range of products ranging from gummy bears to CBD infused coffee to topical salves with organic beeswax and arnica, and they have a tincture, which is I've been taking an eyedropper full of 750 mil every night before I go to bed, and I've been sleeping like a baby. I think longtime listeners know I've had a problem sleeping over the years. And they have like buds of CBD that they sell. They sell pre-rolled. I guess I don't know if you call them a joint, but and Matt, you can speak to this because you're much better at it. But also they have I have some of the keef here. Just keep it on my desk, and I'm not gonna lie. I occasionally just smell it. It's really good. But Matt was a big skeptic of smoking it.
Yep, but I was very skeptical after a terrible experience on Venice Beach in LA last year. But this stuff is actually the real deal. It's insanely. It seems. I mean, organic. They have put it on this pesticide free. They put it on the label, but that stuff usually makes me roll my eyes, but actually believe it because, it's very pleasant to smoke.
And you get 20% off if you use the coupon code LEFTISBEST at sunsetlakecbd.com. Sunsetlakecbd.com. Use Left is Best, 20% off. They're fans of the show, and they wanted to use Left is Best, and I was like, that's a great code. Left is Best, 20% off, sunsetlakecbd.com. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, journalist Vincent Bevins on his book, The Jakarta Method, Washington's Anticommunist Crusade, and the mass murder program that shaped our world. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Vincent Bevins. He was a correspondent for the Washington Post covering Southeast Asia and a correspondent for the LA Times covering Brazil, and now the author of the Jakarta Method, Washington's Anticommunist Crusade, the mass murder program that shaped our world. Vincent, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Your work as a correspondent is obviously led to this topic, and you bookend the book on both ends, I guess, with the story of a woman who ends up who goes from Indonesia to Brazil and ends up protesting against Bolsonaro. Tell us about, I mean, how you came to see this connection, or was it just a function of having reported in both these countries?
Yeah, I think it was, and I think it was taking a look at some sort of ghosts of the Cold War that we thought were gone, returning very sort of clearly and violently in places like Indonesia and Brazil, and it just happened to be luck that I was across the same countries where this mass murder program had sort of one of the strongest connections. But the return of Bolsonaro to the scene here in Brazil, I'm in Sao Paulo now, is only, I think, the most obvious and grating example of the ways in which the darker side of the Cold War continues to shape life in much of the planet.
And much of what is going on is inherited from that era. So, I mean, let's give us just some history of, brief history of Indonesia leading up to the time where you are the main focus of the book in the mid 60s. But give us a sense of that history leading up there.
Yeah, so Indonesia now is the fourth most populous country in the world. It's a very important nation, and it was very important in the years after World War II when it got independence from Dutch colonies. So Indonesia is essentially everything that the Dutch used to control in Asia, and this was a very important part of the history of capitalism, the history of globalization. This is where Columbus was trying to go to get the spices. This is the sort of one of the deepest parts of the relationship between the imperial world and the colonized world. And in at the beginning of the Cold War, a president named Sukarno, who brings together a lot of different strands in Indonesian culture, leads something that is called the Third World Movement. He brings together the countries of the post-colonial world, specifically countries from Africa and Asia, in the attempt to sort of stand up to the countries that used to dominate them and take their rightful place on the world stage. So now we hear the term Third World, and it sounds derogatory, but at the time it was a very optimistic and forward-thinking project. Now, the United States at the beginning of the Third World at first thought that Sukarno and Indonesia were tolerable. This changes in the 1950s for two reasons. One is that the Indonesian Communist Party, which was always an unarmed, moderate party taking part in elections, was doing very well at the polls. This really worried the CIA. And Sukarno's anti-imperial, anti-colonial alliance with the other countries of the Third World, again, caused a lot of consternation in Washington. So the CIA starts in 1955 to carry out a number of attempts to either crush the left in Indonesia or to remove Sukarno.
Vincent, if I could, I mean, and we should say in 55 was sort of the, I guess, I don't know. You tell us. Was that the height of that non-alignment movement? Because that's when Sukarno hosted the Bandung conference, correct?
Exactly. This is the first foundational moment of what leads to the non-aligned movement. This is the proto-non-aligned movement. Sukarno's behind Bandung in 55, and he's a huge part of the 1961 meeting that forms the non-aligned movement in Belgrade, Yugoslavia.
All right, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, continue with the history, because I just wanted to sort of like put that in there. So because I mean, I think, for many of us, the first instinct is to think that there was like a lack of sincerity, maybe, that it wasn't, like, how real was the fear of communism at that point? And I wonder if, just narrowly in this era, that whether it was how much of the threat was non-alignment, if how much of that was, where was that intersection of the feeling of threat of non-alignment and of communism? Was it just that non-alignment like basically makes the host susceptible to communism at that point?
Yeah, I think that there was real and legitimate fears of the Soviet Union in the early Cold War, but those were intentionally exaggerated, often for foreign policy goals. And this was especially true in the so-called Third World. And in the early years of the Eisenhower administration, the CIA coups that topple regimes in Iran and Guatemala, we know now, in the case of Guatemala, for example, that from declassified files, that what they were saying behind the scenes was that they knew that there was no threat from communists, that they knew that there was no chance that sort of a Soviet bloc would be set up in Central America. What they, in their own words, said was their fear is that if Guatemala successfully stood up to, and they used, if this David stands up to the Goliath of Washington, other countries are going to want to do it too. And so although this sort of very violently conflicts with the way we think about the Cold War sometimes, often they were more afraid of democratic, independent socialist movements than they were of the more violent and armed guerrilla groups, because it was easier for them to discredit the guerrilla groups. So in Indonesia, we know this again from declassified files. Richard Nixon, as vice president in the Eisenhower administration, he said democracy probably is the wrong form of government for Indonesia because the communists keep winning. And again, we know that the reason they kept winning is because not they were tricking people or threatening people. They were just the best organized. Again, that's the words of the CIA. They understood that people wanted the communists to take a bigger part in electoral politics in Indonesia.
And so, from what we know with the military coup and the ouster of Arbenz in Guatemala, was that fear of countries that were sort of independent in some respect a function of just, I guess, corporate interests and worry that that certain corporations were going to have their resources nationalized in some fashion?
I think that's a really good question, and there's an ongoing debate as to what extent were U.S. corporate interests predominant, and to what extent was it this sort of fanatical fear of communism. And I think that it could be both. I think these things overlap, right? So in Guatemala, you absolutely had the United Fruit Company putting pressure on the U.S. government to take action, but you also had people that got themselves whipped up into a fervor about the small left-wing parties active in Guatemala. So I think that it could be both. And when you had both things coming together, that was a pretty good indicator that the United States was coming for you.
This is like Paul Wolfowitz's, weapons of mass destruction was the one thing we could all agree on type of situation.
Yeah, and in Indonesia it was both too, right? So in Indonesia, they were very worried about the rise of the Communist Party, but there was also big oil and mining interests. And again, in a very large and strategically important country in the Cold War. And as I say in the book, Indonesia was far more important than Vietnam to the Washington foreign policy establishment. Everyone understood that Vietnam was nothing compared to the much larger, more important country of Indonesia.
Okay, and so what does the United States do in the run-up to the Suharto coup in '65 to, I guess, promote this type of thing? I mean, it starts with they have sort of a three-pronged policy, don't they?
Well, there's three attempts to get rid or to crush communism or to end the sort of the rise of this left-aligned country. The first is they just start trying to they start paying off right-wing conservative parties to hope that they could win elections, but this doesn't work. The communists continue to win more and more. In 1958, there is an actual CIA invasion of the country based on the Guatemalan coup. They have American pilots dropping bombs on these tropical islands and killing civilians. This fails because one of those American pilots crash lands, is caught, and the whole thing is discredited. The whole thing is very publicly exposed by Sukarno and everyone in Indonesia on the left that says, hey, I think the United States is trying to destroy our country. They're proved right.
Ostensibly, who were the people bombing? I mean, what was the story that was floated? Like these bombs are just happening, like they're supposedly the government bombing them?
No, there were regional rebellions. So there were islands that had Indonesian people that were working with the CIA that were rebelling against the central government. And so the CIA and the State Department story was, no, we're not helping them. It's just Indonesians. But the people in Jakarta were saying, wait, these people have weapons that no one in Indonesia has. How are they doing this? And finally,
how do you play off
they were
that
proven right.
How do you play off that it's just, ragtag rebels with the capacity to bomb people from bombers?
Well, yeah, there was a really strange exchange because, this kind of gets to the heart of the dynamic between the United States and the Third World at this time. Even though the central government in Jakarta knew the CIA was bombing them, they didn't want to accuse the United States of that to their face because they didn't want to provoke them. And the New York Times ran an article sort of saying, "Oh, these Indonesians, they're paranoid. There's no way this is possible." So they hold back from even directly accusing the ambassador until it becomes very, very clear what's really happening, and that leads to a shift in U.S. policy towards Indonesia that continues into the Kennedy administration.
And they so talk about the sort of, I guess, the other factors that led up to that coup.
Yeah. So after they realized they couldn't take on the army in Indonesia with this direct invasion, they totally shift tactics and they begin working very closely with the army, bringing them to Kansas to train under U.S. Military officers. And under JFK, who in the 50s was one of the few people in the U.S. foreign policy establishment that was saying, hey, I think the peoples of the former colonial world have a right to choose their own destiny. We shouldn't be treating anybody that's neutral as an enemy. He, for the first 3 years of his, there's only 3 years in total, during his administration until he's assassinated, there is a more or less uneasy peace with Sukarno, where on the one hand, they are backing the military and training the military, but still maintaining good relations with the president. And at the same time, very uncomfortable with the fact that the Indonesian Communist Party, even though elections were stopped after that CIA invasion, very uncomfortable with the fact that they are gaining more and more members. So by Kennedy's death, the Indonesian Communist Party is by far the largest communist party in the world outside of the Soviet Union and China, and probably 25 or 30% of the country is in it. And when Kennedy dies, LBJ changes tactics. He doesn't want to continue to maintain this uneasy alliance. And they bring in a new ambassador, and CIA and MI6, we know now from declassified files, are agitating behind the scenes to cause a clash between the right-wing US-backed army and the unarmed left-wing Indonesian Communist Party, knowing very well that in the clash between a military and an unarmed party, the military is going to win. And under very mysterious circumstances, this is what happens in 1965. This clash does erupt, and to this day, we still don't know exactly how it erupts. What we know is that when it does, the U.S. sees this as an opportunity to do what it's been trying to do for 10 years, to crush the Indonesian Communist Party, and they enthusiastically back and assist the Indonesian military in the intentional mass murder of approximately 1 million people.
Okay, so and I want to just back up a little bit. So from day one, as they're training people at Leavenworth, Fort Leavenworth, and you write about how the military would take these Indonesian military guys out to strip clubs, and there was from day one, was there an agenda to indoctrinate and to just build these relationships? I mean, the whole thing, what I find amazing about this is I didn't, there was very little history of this taught to me when I was,
right.
But I was very aware of School of Americas, and I was very aware of Honduras and Guatemala and Allende and Chile and but this part of our history was sort of so why Leavenworth as opposed to, let's say, School of the Americas?
School of the Americas came later. So this was an earlier iteration of, I guess, a broadly similar pattern. And you said indoctrination, and I think probably the American military officers who were training them in Kansas didn't see it as indoctrination. They saw it as, we're teaching them about American values. We're teaching them about the way that the military can have a positive role in shaping the country and moving the country towards a free market society. One of the people that I met researching this book, and I tell the story through the people that lived through it or interacted with these events personally. He was in Kansas too, and he was an economist, and he understood that, oh, well, they're really what they really want is they're trying to get the military financially dependent on the United States and committed to an anti-communist stance. So they were probably trained in counterinsurgency. They were probably trained in the idea that the military can be a crucial force in moving countries in the third world from sort of backwards tribal formations to a quote unquote modern society, which was very much based on the United States, right? This was an intellectual trend at the time that the military could be used to get these backward countries to be like us, and if they have to cancel democracy for a while to do it, so be it. And was it the plan back then for there to be mass murder? I would guess not. We don't know. We don't know when exactly that solution emerged to this long-standing, very thorny problem for Washington and the Indonesian right wing. But they definitely got the same kind of training that Latin American dictators got, because they were all being trained there together. So there are a lot of Brazilians and other Latin American leaders at Kansas with them at the time.
And so in terms of the sequencing, Suharto comes to power in a coup in 65, and there's a lot of, like you say, there's a lot of mystery around exactly what took place in those moments. But is that essentially when the mass killing went into effect, and how systemic was it?
Yeah, so there is a small but failed uprising, certainly led by military leaders, perhaps with some tacit support or from the Communist Party, perhaps not at all. But there's a small military uprising that it doesn't make there's a lot of things that don't make sense. But immediately Suharto takes control of the country, ignores the fact that President Sukarno is still technically the president, shuts down all media that he does not control, and puts out this horrible propaganda story that the Indonesian Communist Party, specifically the feminist wing of the women's movement of the Indonesian Communist movement, had taken these generals to a horrible den where they were slowly tortured, castrated, and murdered in some kind of a Marxist tantric murder ritual. And this propaganda story, though we know now from declassified files that everybody knew was intentionally a lie. U.S. and British officials helped to spread that propaganda story. Immediately recognized Suharto as the president, or as the leader of the country, even though Sukarno was really the president. Supplied material help to him as he began to oversee the mass arrest of anybody that was on the left. And when people went into jail, they often believed they were just going in for an interview. As I said, these people were part of an unarmed party that had been very successful in elections. Regular people that were in the Indonesian Communist Party or somehow affiliated with it had no idea that they were rebels, this was not like people that believed that they were the bad guys. They thought they would go in and talk to the police and explain whatever, I don't know anything about what happened in Jakarta, and then they'd be out. But instead of that happening, 1 million remained in concentration camps for the next decade or so, and approximately 1 million, maybe less, maybe more, we don't know, because nobody's ever cared enough to really look, were taken out in the middle of the night or when nobody was looking and executed and thrown into a river or disposed of in other ways. And it happened in different ways in different moments across the country. It started in the West, moved east. Bali ends up being probably the most bloody episode. But it is through this murder, it is through the elimination of 1 million or 2 million leftists and the consequent silence that Suharto was able to take power. Because if it were not for destroying Sukarno's base, destroying the 1/3 of the country that was passionately left-wing, he would not have been able to take power. But after destroying these people physically and making all their friends and relatives terrified of speaking out, he was able to take control fully in 1966, and he immediately gets the full backing of the United States and is invited with open arms into the quote-unquote free world.
And that's when all the World Bank and IMF loans come pouring in. And
everyone comes pouring in. There's big parties and upscale hotels celebrating business opportunities for American corporations, and Indonesia becomes the most important ally for the United States in Southeast Asia in the Cold War.
what examples do we have of how aware the United States was of, I mean, 1 million people in a concentration camps and 1,500,000 people basically disappeared on some level. That seems like something that the United States would be well aware of throughout. I mean, how much I guess evidence or record is it of our awareness as to what was going on?
Now there's quite a bit, but it came out very slowly. So I'm just a journalist. I showed up late to this story, but it's only possible through the heroic work of academic historians in the United States and activists in Indonesia that they slowly got these files declassified, that we're able to reconstruct exactly how much the United States government knew, especially the embassy in Jakarta over this period, and they knew a lot. Not only do they know a lot, they encouraged more killings. I mean, later someone gave an interview to the Washington Post saying that he passed lists of communists onto the Indonesian military so that they could be murdered, so they could be crossed off, and they could, coordinate that everyone that got what was coming to them. That's just the State Department, though. The CIA still has not told us what they did in the early 60s. I asked. Unsurprisingly, they didn't tell me. But now it is possible, and I try to lay this out clearly in the book, to establish exactly what the State Department was saying to Washington at the time, how much they knew, how horribly complete the picture that they were getting was as they were encouraging the Indonesian military to do what it takes to crush the left and take power.
And what it ultimately did was it had sort of a twofold, as in your book is really about the ripples of, in many respects, right, of this. But one of those ripples, which is fascinating and I hadn't even contemplated, was the idea that once you take out the unarmed left, you are then sort of provided a really easy boogeyman, because all that's left is the highly militant, militarized left.
Right. This is really underappreciated, that we forgot about it now because it's sunk into the memory hole, not only because I think it's so horrible, but because Vietnam sort of dominated U.S. thinking for the next 10 years. But everyone else was paying attention at the time. And you can be damn sure that the people that were paying attention to the largest unarmed party in the history of socialism were other socialists around the world that were thinking about what path to take. And when they saw that the largest unarmed party in the history of socialism was all murdered and thrown into rivers, a lot of people came to the conclusion, perhaps regrettable, but also perhaps understandable, that they had to arm, they had to get hardcore. Someone was coming for them. If they didn't go to the hills and form secret organizations with machine guns, the same thing could happen to them. So we have evidence that this happened in multiple countries, Pol Pot being probably the most horrible example. Pol Pot says, and we found evidence that the Khmer Rouge came to this conclusion, but the Cultural Revolution in 1967 in China may have been inspired, or was certainly inspired to a large extent by this. I spoke to the founder of the Communist Party of the Philippines. He came to the same conclusion for this reason. In Latin America, these debates raged up and down the hemisphere as to whether or not the peaceful road to socialism could really work. And a lot of people saw this and thought, well, no, it can't. We have to get hardcore.
Was there, in terms of Indonesia, was there a big sort of, was there an equivalent to, I don't know, ITT or, a big banana importer? I mean, what were the products that maybe the United States was also sort of interested in terms of Indonesia?
Oil. So it sounds, it's the same, it's that old cliche, but oil was the most important thing. And then there was the secondary awareness that there were really important mineral deposits on the island of Papua. So one sort of counterfactual that defenders of the U.S. State Department at this time have sort of offered is like, well, no, like we couldn't stop. They were doing what they wanted to do. But in this period when all the killing was taking place, there was the discussion of changing the regulations, the discussion over the extent to which American companies would have a right to exploit Indonesia's oil resources, and the U.S. threw the full weight of its influence on Suharto to make sure immediately that they got access to that oil, and Suharto caved immediately. Oil was the most important export. And then there was the geopolitical angle as well with all of Southeast Asia in play. I mean, the domino theory, if the domino theory holds any water, Indonesia is by far the biggest domino. But
Right.
Oil, just once more oil.
I want to get to Chile and Brazil, but I'm curious, how much of what happened in East Timor and the United States, just sort of, hand waving, Kissinger's essentially like, do what you do you,
Right. Yep.
Smart. How much of that was a function of like, it worked last time, or just sort of, in for a penny, in for a pound type of attitude?
Well, absolutely. The horrific invasion of East Timor that Suharto undertook in 1975 is a consequence of what happened a decade before. And I think in his case, it was more cynical. He used anti-communism as his justification. So when East Timor gets their independence from Portugal, there is a small element within the East Timorese resistance, which is left-wing, which is like, as is inevitable at this point in the 20th century, that there be some parts of an anti-colonial movement that were left-wing. He uses that as an excuse to invade and take over. And as a result of this invasion, approximately 1/3 of the people of East Timor die, which is, by the way, more than died under Pol Pot. And the term that is used for it is that Washington give Indonesia a big wink. Basically, you do you. And again, this is not under Nixon. This is not under the big bad guys. I mean, a lot of this was happening under Jimmy Carter.
Yep. All right. Well, let's get back to the sort of the trajectory of your book, because this Jakarta Method, which I guess you could also call maybe the Fort Leavenworth method, becomes basically a code word, like that is used throughout Latin America as, be careful, you don't want this to happen. Nice country you have here, but you don't want the Jakarta Method.
Yeah. So as just like left-wing movements around the world took lessons from 1965, so did right-wing movements, either radical anti-communists or allies of Washington or potential allies of Washington. They saw what happened in 1965, and they saw, number one, that it worked. Number two, that Indonesia got away with it. And so they began to take lessons from this, sometimes in direct contact with people that had intimate knowledge of the operations, and other times just sort of watching from afar and learning what they thought that victory offered them in terms of instruction. And so under the government of Salvador Allende, started in 1970, the CIA from the very beginning was agitating to stop him from taking over as president in the first place, and certainly just to overthrow him when he's in power. And so is the Brazilian military, which has been in power since the U.S.-backed 1964 coup. And in both Brazil and Chile, in the early 70s, you see the emergence of Jakarta as a metaphor or code word for the mass murder of leftists. It's more of a secret code word in Brazil, which only comes out much later. In Chile, it's very obvious because it's a public terror campaign. What it is on the walls of Santiago, the slogan or the threat appears, Jakarta is coming, or just Jakarta. And military officers begin to talk about Plan Jakarta, or they send postcards to the houses of socialists or supporters of Allende that say Jakarta is coming. And the message is very clear by this point for anyone that's been paying attention to what happened in the Cold War in Asia. Jakarta is coming means we're going to kill you like they killed the Indonesians. And in 1973, after the CIA-backed coup overthrows Allende and installs Pinochet, this is exactly what happens. Jakarta does come. And then Brazil and Indonesia collaborate with many other Southern American countries to create an international mass murder network in 1975 called Operation Condor.
And just tease that out for us, for those who don't know what Condor was.
Right. So after Pinochet takes power, he wipes out his enemies, just as Suharto did. He kills far less people, and they're proud of this. They think they're being efficient because, again, the point of this violence is not like wanton retribution. It's for a purpose, right? And Suharto killed a lot of people. Chile, they were proud that they only had to kill a few thousand. But the countries of the Southern Cone, and Argentina ends up becoming the most violent of these, and that was only 1976. But the countries of the Southern Cone realize, oh, well, some of my enemies are getting away. They're going across the border into another U.S.-backed right-wing dictatorship. Why don't we form an alliance so that we can hunt down all the dangerous leftists across borders and make the world safe for authoritarian capitalism? And Operation Condor is this. It is the collaboration across borders to hunt down and kill enemies of the right-wing regimes backed by the United States. Now, the actual cross-border operations kill a few hundred people. Member countries of Operation Condor killed tens of thousands of people. And again, it works, right? They get away with it. Washington, to the extent that they say anything about this, they come to the defense of these countries. They play defense for the Condor dictatorships. And they do establish a long-term authoritarian capitalist system, which, we had redemocratization in Latin America later, but the fundamental social structure that these dictatorships were set up to preserve is basically intact. And in the late 70s, when Central America becomes a problem again for the forces of violent capitalism, these Operation Condor countries train Central American death squads, and then so do U.S. officials, and this is where the School of the Americas comes in. This is a later iteration in training right-wing forces in counterinsurgency and domestic terrorism, basically state terrorism.
So, when we see Bolsonaro in particular rise in Brazil, what we're really seeing in many respects is a reemergence of what was 50 years ago, I guess.
Yeah, it's the full resurrection of the ideology that powered the Jakarta Method in South America. This is not hyperbole, right? Like as a congressman, he said the only way we're ever going to fix Brazil is not with democracy, is with a civil war that gets done what the military dictatorship didn't do by killing 30,000 people. And if we have to kill innocent people, that's fine. He's very explicitly celebrating, not only admitting, the legacy from which he arises.
That's a very direct, right? That is almost a ham-fisted example of the sort of the ripples through time that this era created and as you say, shaped our world. I want to hear about some of the other ways, but what really struck me was, and I don't think I had ever contemplated the idea that in many respects, when you kill these many people and put these many people into a concentration camp over in that short of period of time, and determined to do so specifically by ideology, you have a grave impact on that ideology itself. Because I guess I've always had this sort of contemplate this notion of like, well, ideas, have a resiliency and a durability that humans don't, but they can in fact get submerged and entire sort of like vernaculars destroyed in a society when you take out that many people who subscribe to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you speaking about left-wing traditions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. In Indonesia to this day, and this is the thing that really, I knew a bit about how bad things had gone in South America. When I got to Indonesia, I was really shocked. Like, it is literally illegal to use some of the terms that were a part of national discourse in the 50s and 60s. It is illegal to do anything that can be construed by anyone as a defense of Marxism-Leninism. And as we pointed to, I think earlier, like it caused the deformation of other socialist movements worldwide. People got really self-defensive. Che Guevara was in Guatemala in 1954 when Arbenz was overthrown. He came to the conclusion that any other revolution had to be centrally organized and defensive, because if you tried sort of open liberal democracy, you left yourself open to the inevitable imperialist invasion. He wasn't, I don't know, was he wrong? U.S. did come at Cuba and the Bay of Pigs, and if they had been a multi-party democracy with people that the U.S. could have bought off, it might have fallen. I mean, I don't know if that was a good thing in the long term, but you could understand why they came to these really self-defensive, paranoid conclusions, because they were worried about being murdered and having all their friends thrown into concentration camps. I mean, and in the areas of Southeast Asia close to Indonesia, you saw this really unfold really tragically.
And in many respects, that reality is still in effect. I mean, we just 2 days out from the Times basically backing off the claim that Evo Morales in Bolivia, cheated in his election, which was the sort of I guess the catalyst or the excuse for a right-wing coup.
Yeah, I mean, the really remarkable but also frustrating thing is that the Cold War ends, but certain patterns and certain technologies of regime change, technologies of repression of social movements continue to reappear in almost identical form, but the patterns are often not realized. I mean, in Bolivia, you saw a replay almost, blow for blow of the way things worked in the Cold War, that there would be a president that was on the left that did make some mistakes before the moment of the coup. There was, there's never been a coup where there was not something that the president did wrong, because this is the nature of politics. Morales definitely made real mistakes in running again. He would have been ideal for him to anoint a successor. But then at the moment when there is this real push to get rid of the leader, there's a disinformation campaign, whether intentional or unintentional, but it's seized upon by all the people that want to see a certain outcome, which is the removal of Morales. And then, lo and behold, we don't just get a new election. We get the country delivered to a tiny right-wing minority, which can only stay in power through repression. I mean, and this is, and it was, again, it's frustrating because in the hours after Morales was forced out of the country, the writing was on the wall for a lot of people down here in South America, or others that know South America. And I'm not just talking on the left. A lot of center-right liberal thinkers were saying, oh, no, well, the only way that this new president's going to be able to hold on to power is through repression. She has absolutely no social base. And so I think it's important to understand this history, not only because it formed so much of the basis of what globalization is that we inhabit now, but also because these techniques of regime change, counterinsurgency, repression of social movements get reproduced because they worked last time.
Right. It's just best practices now. What's also interesting is that, the only thing that is missing from this thing is, I guess, the genuine fear of, Cold War fear, right? Like somehow we've been able to make the transition rather seamlessly from there's a legitimate fear of, that some people had in the 50s and the 60s of a Soviet beachhead, just however many miles from our southern border. But now, what ostensibly there's no threat. I mean, how do you it's really just sort of some type of fig leaf of righteousness, and it's just naked, essentially corporate and capitalist concerns, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really good question. I mean, and historians that know the U.S. better than me are tackling with this now. But it's just, if you take a really big step back, I mean, one historian that I thought has done amazing work on this is Odd Arnwestad, who he says, well, he looks at the long history of the United States, and he says, well, the Cold War wasn't really an anomaly. The United States has always had some kind of militaristic confrontation of some kind of external power. Either they were conquering North America, or they were conquering Central America and Southeast Asia, or they were fighting quote unquote communism, or they were fighting quote unquote terrorism. This is just perhaps hardwired into the nature of the United States government.
Well, that's a nice thought.
Yeah.
Vincent Bevins, the book is The Jakarta Method: Washington's Anti-Communist Crusade and the Mass Murder Program That Shaped Our World. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. We will put a link to your book at majority.fm. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
All right, folks. There you go. I thought that would be a nice, little break from the crap show that we have going on here, just to look back on a horrible moment in history that we as taxpayers financed in at least in terms of helping, which is not to say that there weren't bad enough people locally to carry it out, but I knew very little of that history.
Yeah, I'd heard of Condor in Vietnam, but never the Jakarta Method.
Yes, never heard of that. And I knew Guatemala, which 54. I knew about that more. Maybe it was just a function of the classes I took in college, where it was more Central America as opposed to Latin America. Is probably.
Well, a lot of this was recently declassified. I mean,
and maybe it was, and I knew more about East Timor, and maybe that's why, because it was just in an era where it was. And maybe Vietnam overshadowed it, but 1 million people, geez. Folks, a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you support this program, and you get the free show, free of commercials. Although we should leave in, maybe once a week, we'll leave in the Sunset Lake Cbd ads for people, because they get 20% off with Left is Best, and that's nothing to sneeze at, folks. But your support is what makes this show possible. We were joking the other day about how every show we did last week got demonetized because on YouTube for, I think, obvious reasons. You don't want to necessarily, if you're a major corporation, you don't necessarily want to, and you don't know how your ads will be portrayed in the context of a show. I guess you don't want it, right next to the bludgeoning of an innocent protester by a cop. So, but be that as it may, your support makes this show possible. Join themajorityreport.com. Don't forget, we also have our swag. Swag is available at shop.majorityreportradio.com. Shop.majorityreportradio.com. Maybe I'll get a URL to send people there. But also joining us for the fun half will be Nomi Konst in the now. Congratulations, Nomi. The what appears to be a new epicenter.
Yeah, I just go from one to the other, Queens to Arizona.
Well done. Maybe it's you.
It's all me. Just me sitting in my house, being a witch,
there you
vexing
go.
the state. I did swear at all the Trumpsters and say, you're going to cause this. And turns out they did.
Has anybody called you up around the neighborhood and said, sorry, Nomi, we should have listened to you?
Not my cousin sort of did.
Really?
Sort of. But he's been pretty responsible once I, yelled at him for hanging out with people. Because I was like, they support Trump. They're probably not thinking things through. And he's like, oh, I didn't know that.
So what do you have on before we go to the fun half? What's on your show this week?
So we are talking about astrology. No, we're talking about, I'm kidding. We're talking about obviously the uprisings. A lot about defund, the defund police movement. The Alex Vitale is on. I think we had him on recently too.
Spoke to him yesterday. Yeah,
exactly.
Excellent.
He's brilliant. I think I interviewed him a few years ago, and it's just great that his research is now coming to the forefront and mainstream. We talked to a progressive DA candidate. He's a civil rights attorney named Janos Martin, an old friend of mine. He was on the Moreland Commission, if you recall that. Janos he was part of the Close Rikers campaign, which is a jail in New York, and he is running for DA of Manhattan. That's an election next year. but his background's in criminal justice reform. And we talked to Raleek Hayes, who is one of the lead organizers in Baltimore, came out of the Freddie Gray protests, and he's just talked about the work that they're doing on the ground there and working with other communities across the country, learning from each other. That
sounds awesome. Blockbuster stuff. When does that get posted? Is that up now?
Yesterday, yeah. The full show went up yesterday, last night. You can check it out on The Nomiki Show on YouTube.
Patreon.com, The Nomiki Show, and on YouTube, youtube.com, Nomiki
The Nomiki
Cons.
Show. We finally got it.
Oh, you did?
Took a minute, yeah. We had to pull some strings with YouTube to get our own little...
Oh, great.
Yes.
All right. Well, that makes it easier. Folks, also, you should check out TMBS. They are live tonight, patreon.com/TMBS or youtube.com, The Michael Brooks Show. Matt, any idea who's on tonight?
Vivek Chibber on the ABCs of Capitalism and the Future of Socialism.
There you go. Vivek Chibber. Also, check out The Antifada, patreon.com/The Antifada. Matt, what's happening on your Twitch stream?
Literary Hangover. I'm going to start up listening to James Fenimore Cooper's The Pilot, 1823 novel, which is the first sea tale written in America. Sea novel, I guess you'd call it. And I'll be playing Assassin's Creed Rogue. So look for that later in the week. Twitch.tv/Literary Hangover.
Oh my God, I get such a kick out of those plugs.
Matt, who's leading the Literary Hangover standings of return authors? Is it Fenimore Cooper or is it Orwell right now? Or Orwell has his own series, right?
Orwell has his own series, but it might be Hawthorne, actually.
And but what about, like, do you keep the score? Like, what's your, like, is it just your top score? Or you?
Oh, no, Brendan has invented this just based on...
Yeah, I keep a scoring system.
Well, but I mean, not just for the authors, but I mean actually in the game.
Oh, well, it's Assassin's Creed, so it's how many, redcoats you take down.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Right. Folks, also check out the AM Quickie, amquickie.com. 7-8 minutes in your inbox every morning. At 8:30, we usually get it out by. So check that out. And, of course, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. It is what makes it possible for me to get through every show. This is basically it every day. That's my cup of coffee. All right, quick break. 646-257-3920. Fun half. See you there. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238-56-27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
I think I might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird.
No way.
Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey! Shut up.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
So, Nomi, you're in Arizona. It is arguably the new epicenter. Apparently, very close to sort of cresting in the number of ICU beds that are there. Is that right?
Yes, I heard. As of what I read this morning, that the largest healthcare provider in Arizona is Banner Health. They sort of bought all the hospitals out, and they announced that pretty much all hospital beds are taken in Tucson and in Phoenix. And just to put this in perspective, the state opened 2 weeks ago, a little over 2 weeks ago, and everybody thought it was premature. I have seen, I do my regular grocery runs. I've probably been going out a little bit more, but definitely protected, just, going to the grocery store pretty much more often than usual. And it's jarring. It's like people just aren't wearing masks. They're like, oh, it's done. They don't, there's conspiracy theorists out there. It's way more, it's shocking because I still follow some friends from Tucson that I went to school with, or family friends. And I'm really shocked by how many conspiracy theorists are out there in Arizona. And I mean, this is Tucson. Tucson's, there were Democratic electeds here, but it's
right. That's fascinating. And I guess, I mean, what was interesting, we were talking about this, I think Brendan brought this up before the show. There's not national media in Arizona, right? Like, the national media is in New York and it's in California to the extent that it is.
Right.
And in DC.
Yep.
And it's one thing when the national media is in New York, and obviously the number of deaths in New York, much larger than hopefully anywhere else in the country.
Yeah.
But it also is enhanced by the fact that reporters are here, and they're reporting out about it. But there's not a lot of national stories about Arizona. Basically, the curve basically breaking, essentially, is what it is. Instead of flattening, it actually sort of snaps, and
it's spiked. I mean, the cases, to be fair, the cases have gone down in the last couple of days, but I mean, it's absolutely related to the opening of the economy. I mean, of course, conservatives are saying it's the protests, but Tucson has barely had any protests, just to put that in.
Well, they didn't have protests 2 weeks ago.
Exactly. But, that's just the right-wing machine, because what happens in absence of strong reporting, and, to be fair, there are a couple of papers here that still exist, not as many, and this is happening all across the country. State House reporting has been completely wrecked everywhere in the country since we had our media crisis, and you just don't have the best quality local reporters. You have to rely.
The sheer numbers.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So, I mean, and then not to mention that the Navajo Nation is in Arizona. Whether that's related I think it's very hard for us to kind of put that in perspective. I think the Navajo Nation, which borders other states too, but the Navajo Nation just doesn't have access to water, which is a big cause there, being able to wash your hands, and then also just doctors and medical assistants. So they might be correlated. I mean, it's very hard to know. I think it has more to do with the fact that people are just out and about without masks. So I have to make this very clear. This isn't like New York opening up, or the protests even in New York where everybody's wearing masks. Nobody's wearing masks here. I mean, even the people who I'm watching, like service workers, they have to wear masks, but they're very lax about it. I see people without their masks on, not wearing gloves. It's an alternate reality. It's like they know, the corporate structure, is forcing the workers to comply, but no one's really.
Wow.
It's bad. Yeah.
Wow.
Somehow.
And that's interesting about the Navajo. That is, we've talked about this in the past, that there's a huge disparity in white infection rates, Black infection rates, Latino infection rates, and also indigenous infected rates around the country, and also a function of, certainly in some instances, a function also of money and, folks having to go to work, or whether there's an infrastructure, or whether there's a public hospital available to people. And I imagine that when that one hospital group came in and bought up those hospitals, shutting down, extra capacity was one of their first acts. Yeah. We should also say that you're from Buffalo, right?
Yeah, I'm just all over the news today, aren't
yeah,
I?
you
Oh, man.
So I think people are well aware of what happened in Buffalo. You had a 75-year-old man who was shoved by the cops for really, nobody could really figure out why in any reason. I mean, it was completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
And shoved the cops. I mean, he was shoved by the cops, slammed on the ground, began bleeding profusely. He is still in critical condition, is my understanding, in a hospital up in Buffalo. And two of the cops involved in shoving him were fired. And so like 75 cops associated with, I don't know, some squad, they all resigned, at least from the squad. I don't know if they resigned from the whole force.
From what I understand, no. It was just that unit.
They just changed their assignment. They didn't want to be assigned to, I guess, busting heads in protests. And we played a clip of all the cops applauding these two guys who had been arraigned. Well, now it's gone next level, because OWN, this is the One American News Network, did a segment on this guy's connection to Antifa. Look at this clip here.
New reports find a protester pushed by Buffalo police was appearing to use common Antifa tactics. One America's Christian Rose looks into the matter.
And I think cops are bad. He's looking to get punched in the face. Say stuff, that's what it is. Get fired and lose their pension.
A new report finds the latest tensions at the Buffalo Police Department could be a result of a false flag provocation by far-left group Antifa. According to the conservative Treehouse Saturday, 75-year-old protester Martin Gugino, shoved by the Buffalo police at last week's protest, is a well-known activist bragging on social media about far-left views. His detention last Thursday sparked outrage amid ongoing national unrest, resulting in resignations of dozens of Buffalo police officers.
You don't take a baton and shove him, along with the officer next to him using his right hand and shoving him.
However, newly released videos appear to show Gugino using a police tracker on his phone, trying to scan police communications during the protest. The tactic known as skimming is an old trick used by Antifa to locate police officers and plan violent activities, bypassing the police response. In addition, the 75-year-old, who's been referred to as an agitator, was supposedly using the technology to black out police communications. That, however, didn't quite work, and many Buffalo police officers support their embattled colleagues.
And they were applauded by their colleagues as they left the courthouse. Officers Robert McCabe and Aaron Torgalski pleaded not guilty.
The arrest of McCabe and Torgalski and subsequent resignations by 57 of their fellow officers on the unit sparked concerns of public safety in the city. Meanwhile, mainstream media failed to acknowledge the controversy and were continuing to push the narrative of so-called police brutality.
Now, what they're claiming he had some device on his phone that was scanning police communications? Was it just like a phone, or did he have like a police scanner. Like
it's a scanner that you would find. I was listening to them on Twitter. You can find them if you just search Brooklyn police scanner. People put them online. You can listen to.
But weren't they implying that he was taking the phone and like putting it near their equipment to jam it or something?
Yeah.
That I mean it's
okay. Does that justify shoving him on the ground and knocking him unconscious?
Well, first off, it's made up. That whatever that device is doesn't exist. And it's certainly not why the cops are doing it. Like, do you have one of those scanners that you're jamming our technology? Now, you would have to be a complete lunatic to listen to that report and believe it. I mean, yes, I imagine the guy was had left-wing views. He's out there, presumably part of a protest on police violence. So that's but this other jamming part, like he's a false flag operation. Like I'm going to do the old, where I get shoved and crack my head open on the sidewalk, false flag operation that we got going. This is, whatever we call this. Let's do the Buffalo flip, I think is what they call it. And what kind of lunatic do you have to be to believe this stuff? Well, you apparently have to be the one who is, presumably the leader of the free world. That, of course, is Donald Trump. Here he is tweeting out this morning after seeing that report. Buffalo protester shoved by police could be an Antifa provocateur. 75-year-old Martin Guengo. I mean, he's being doxxed, right? I mean, obviously you can get the name of this guy, but like the president is singling this guy out. Was pushed away after appearing to scan police communications in order to black out the equipment. I watched. He fell harder than was pushed.
That's the
was
part
aiming scanner. Could be a setup.
I mean, fell harder. This is, again...
This is sheer insanity.
This is so insane. But again, he's bleeding from his skull. And I think the reaction folks are having, who cares about the scanner? It's a distraction, whatever, is that the police, one by one, ignored the fact that there was blood. If they cared so much about the scanner, why didn't they grab the phone out of his hand? Because if you watch the video over and over like I did, it falls out of his hand, which shows that he's unconscious. So instead of going to his aid, and there's a couple of officers who try, and then you see the other officers pull him away. So there's intent to leave this man potentially dying on the ground and just continue on.
Well, no, wait, but do you have any reason to believe why that it might actually be some type of scanning device? Like, I don't even know what that means.
He probably was just taking a picture of their badges.
You can listen on a scanner to the police radio.
Probably just taking a picture of their badges. None of it is relevant. What is relevant is there was intent there of murder because he was on the ground dying.
I think he was just pointing and saying, like, why are you guys carrying guns? But who knows? Like this is sheer insanity. Now, this is him. This is Donald Trump reacting to a video that everyone saw.
Right.
What's going to happen if he loses in Wisconsin by 5,000 votes? I mean, we know what he said about New Hampshire, right? When he lost in New Hampshire. And what's Bill Barr going to do when the president says, OWN just did a report on how there was, 5,700 undocumented immigrants brought into Wisconsin to vote. And, I mean, like this is I don't know. Let me put it this way. I don't know that he operates with any type of sort of strategy or plans or whatnot. But I do know that this is basically training his people to believe anything. If you could look at that video and come up with like, that's a false flag operation. I mean, that guy was in there scanning and then he purposely fell harder on his head than the shove warranted. Because I know 75-year-olds and, you push them up here, they have their body weight is distributed in such a way they couldn't possibly fall that way. I mean, this is, and he's basically training his people to believe this stuff.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. Let's go to the phones. Oh, look who got in quick. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this?
Good afternoon, Sam. It's John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. How are you, John?
I'm good. Today will be primaries in Georgia, West Virginia, South Carolina, Nevada, and North Dakota. In Georgia's 7th district, the leftist candidate, Nabila Islam, who has been endorsed by brand new Congress, the Matriarch PAC, who Noma Keys, very, a member of AOC's Courage to Change PAC, and has raised over $600,000 and currently is third in fundraising among the 6 Democratic candidates in the race. So in Georgia, if no candidate gets a majority of the vote, there will be a runoff, which will be on August 11th. So in the 2018 Georgia 7th District was the closest race in the nation, where Republican Rob Woodall only won by 219 votes.
Wow.
Out of the over 280,000 votes cast. So Woodall opted not to run again in 2020, and Carolyn Bordeaux was the Democratic candidate in the race and is running again this year. And she's raised over $1.7 million and is the favorite. But, we got a lot of support behind Nabila Islam, and so hopefully it's going to be a great night, and hopefully she'll, at least get into the runoff, live to fight another day, and we'll go from there.
I interviewed her a couple of months ago. She was great.
She's we're working so closely with her. I have to say, she's an extraordinary candidate. I mean, this
do you guys have any
district.
polling? Do you have any sense, or is it nobody?
No.
Nobody takes polling.
It's
down
very Well, part of it is just everything's mail in. Well,
Right.
mail in. They changed the election date. It was initially supposed to be in May, and then they moved it to now today. And one of the big issues is, this district is now a majority minority district, and it didn't used to be. And it was the closest district in the nation that it was just said, which is extraordinary. And she's been able to build this operation, very, very impressive operation for a progressive grassroots candidate. I have to say, I talk to campaigns every single day on the grassroots side. She has been so focused from the first time we interviewed her in the fall, and no one was supporting her. I mean, she was so focused that we were like, she's going to be able to carry this through. And I think, at the end of the day, that the money that she raised, the majority of it she did on her own. And I have to say that because it's really hard as a progressive to raise money.
Right.
And I think I want to make just a comment, because I think this is really important. As progressives, there are a lot of progressive figures out there, elected officials, and they save their endorsements till the end. But those endorsements help candidates raise money and build their operations. And the earlier they can get those endorsements, the better it is for their campaigns. And so what's been so impressive is she was able to do this without having a slew of endorsements come in, like AOC and, Benjelis and Ro Khanna. A lot of those came in the last couple of months, which is great. But imagine, including Summalise Lopez, who's just endorsed today by Bernie. Imagine that endorsement coming in January and not June.
Right.
How
right.
that would have how it could transform the race. And I think that's something we as a movement have to really pressure our leaders to do.
Why do they wait that long? Is it just to see what the chances of this person winning are, because they don't want to expend their political cachet for?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think it's really, I'm just going to say it straight up. I think it's cowardly. I think it is not how progressives should operate. Ro Khanna is really good about this. He supports early because it can make such a big difference. When you have that look at Jamal Bowman. Jamal Bowman has that coalition around him early, and as a result has been able to build this steady campaign and consolidate the left in a way that a lot of other candidates haven't been able to. And there's a lot of bad, Democrats in Congress, right? Melanie DeRigo also has a race in June. She's running against Tom Suozzi, who caucuses with Republicans. He's a Democrat. And so I really think this is a lesson that lawmakers need to hear. Yeah. Because this isn't the establishment. You're running against the establishment. They have millions of dollars and putting ads on TV every single day. The sooner those endorsements can come
get in earlier. Yeah. John, give me a sense of West Virginia. Stephen Smith is running for governor there. That's a really has the potential to be he's running for the Democratic nomination, I should say. How's that looking?
It's looking pretty good. He's running against the main competition is this guy named Ben Salongo, who's endorsed by Joe Manchin. So I mean, it tells you a lot right there.
Right.
So there was one poll. Salongo is at 30%, Smith is at 27%, and everybody else is pretty far back. So and they've also raised about the same amount of money. So this is pretty much a toss-up race, between Smith and Salongo, and hopefully Smith will take it. And also, in the Senate race, Paula Jean Swearingen, who a lot of people know from the movie, the AOC movie, and she's running again. She got over 30% of the vote last time against Joe Manchin, and she is the favorite this time. She's raised over $357,000, and Richard Ojeda is the other person running who ran for Congress in the 3rd District in 2018. But it's looking pretty good. Paula Jean should win, and I'm very hopeful because she's really got a great, progressive lineup. Issue set, and she's been a big, Bernie supporter and supporter of the left for many years. So it's going to be a tough task, taking on Capito Moore, but stranger things have happened. In 2008, the two of the districts were only won by the congressional districts were won by 10 and 13 points. So
right.
I mean, anything can happen. Also, what else? In the 13th district of Georgia, brand new Congress endorsed Michael Owens is running against Blue Dog David Scott. So hopefully that's going to be a pretty hard race to win. But I mean, if you live in that district, I definitely support Michael Owens. He's a really good candidate. Also, Lisa Ring in the 1st district, she won in 2018 the Democratic primary, and she lost by 15 points in a pretty red district. But she, again, really good candidate, supports Medicare for all and a lot of, Bernie's agenda. And so those are some of the main things that are going on tonight. One thing also, that I was wondering when you were going to play that clip about the Trump clip that you just played. Here in San Antonio, we have the head of the Republican Party, Cynthia Bream, and she's been getting a lot of people, even Republicans, Cornyn, Chip Roy, Abbott, they're all calling for her to resign because she says, I think that there was at the very least a possibility that this was a film public execution of a black man by a white cop with the purpose of creating racial tensions and driving a wedge in a growing group of anti-deep state sentiment from common people that have been traumatized psychologically by COVID-19 fears. I mean, so she's saying that this whole George Floyd is a staged event. I mean, and even Republicans are telling her to resign. And this is happening all across Texas. You're having all of these GOP chairs just making these, back crap crazy comments. And even Republicans are saying, this is going way too far, resign. And it's just amazing that the level that it's come to.
All right, John. Well, I appreciate the update. Stay safe there. I know you guys are starting to have more hospitalizations, so stay safe.
All right. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, John.
Hey, Sam, just real quick, I have a little bit of an update on Nabila's race as we're talking. So the election is a disaster right now. Quote, a disaster. Long lines, sites getting shut down, missing equipment. I was just shared a bunch of locations with errors. Journalists are now writing about it. 20% of the districts have missing or no equipment, missing machines, printers.
Wow.
Scanners, paper, literally coming in as Georgia.
There you go.
Democracy?
What a total crap show. It really is amazing. I mean, we can't get our voting right in under normal circumstances. This is... It's nuts.
They're just shutting down locations. How? Why? Where? Do we need election monitors?
Let's take another phone call.
We do.
Call from a 702 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Evan from Las Vegas.
Evan from Las Vegas, what's on your mind?
Well, you talked about it briefly, how we should be concerned about Trump spreading these conspiracy theories. Like, if Biden does win in November, which is looking more and more possible, what do you see happening? Like, do you think Trump will be out of office in January, or how is this going to play out? Are we going to have a civil war?
I don't think we'll have a civil war. I don't think that'll come until third quarter of 2021. I think I'm joking. I think that let me put it this way. I will be very surprised if assuming Joe Biden wins, which I don't think is a safe assumption. I don't think we should assume that at all. But in the hypothetical you're presenting, I will be very surprised if Trump concedes within weeks of that election result. I suspect we're going to see Bill Barr go to the Supreme Court with some claims of something, and I don't know what it's going to be, but yes, I think there's going to be an attempt. And I won't even fancy guess. I mean, look at the insanity that we have been like that. Obviously Donald Trump is not responsible for COVID-19. He is responsible for the anemic response that we have across the country. There are others who share responsibility. Cuomo and de Blasio did some really stupid things as well. But I mean, when a pandemic is really, I think you minimize local, they execute policies, but broadly speaking, you need a national policy. I mean, so I wouldn't have anticipated a pandemic. And I don't know, maybe if I had known there was going to be a pandemic, I would be able to tell you, yes, Donald Trump is going to screw it up, the response. So I have no idea. But I think it's going to get ugly. And I think, remember the Tea Party protests, there were people showing up with guns about health care.
The protests to reopen the economy, people were showing up with guns.
So the idea that maybe, I don't know because I don't know that these people would fire at the cops. I don't think so, particularly based upon what I've seen of the cops this time. Then the cops might be out there with them.
I have a question.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The cops and military are probably on his side. So.
Well, I don't know about the military. I'll tell you something. Like I don't think the military is on his side.
Well, Trump said that today. He was like, the Defense Department is with the Democrats and the police are with Trump. I mean, what?
Yeah. Well, I think there's some, I don't know that the Defense Department is with the Democrats per se, but I do think my sense is that Trump feels that he has the police and they have like these elite squads from these federal branches of agencies and that he can assemble them without uniforms. And I think the military basically, when Jim Mattis, and as far as I'm concerned, I never want to hear from that guy ever again. But when he speaks, he's speaking for the active military because they can't speak out. So they get the retired guys to do it.
What if more
Appreciate
cities?
the call.
What if more
Thank
cities? Great question. I think, because honestly, I think there's some validity to this. It's not outside of the spectrum of reality at this point. But if you have more cities that are obviously led by Democrats and they choose to defund police, and you have real operations like what happened with Minneapolis, I mean, there goes Trump's leverage, right? You have a bunch of police departments being broken up, and I mean,
I don't know. I mean, I don't anticipate that much happening on that front that it would materially impact, those type of things. But I think it's more likely that we're going to have some type of crisis that's going to be predicated on a Supreme Court decision that I think Democrats are going to be less inclined to accept this go round. Mm-hmm. And that would be that's my guess, but who knows? Let's take a little bit of a break and watch someone whine about something that I find, I don't know. Look, it's possible that Ben Shapiro is a big sports fan. It's not inconceivable.
He's a little sports fan.
He's a little sports fan. But all of this, I think, just sounds like a lot of BS to me. Like he claims he's a lifelong reader of Sports Illustrated, and I would bet that the only episode or the only what do you call it? I don't even remember what you call that now with magazines. Volumes?
Issue.
Yeah. The only issue of Sports Illustrated that he kept was the swimsuit edition every year. But here is Ben Shapiro bemoaning the fact that sports has been ruined for him. Nomi, it's been ruined because it's so political.
Now, Clay, it does make me wonder whether inevitably we're going to end up with basically two sports leagues. Whether at some point people are just going to want a sports league that does not allow this sort of stuff to impede the play or get on the field, and people are just going to view that, because I got to say,
that's called the NCAA, folks.
I've been fairly tolerant of this stuff in terms of watching sports my entire life. There are only a couple of times where I've really turned off the TV. One was, when it came to Sports Illustrated, I was a lifelong subscriber to Sports Illustrated. My parents gave it to me for my bar mitzvah.
Incidentally,
so annoying.
Sports Illustrated is a magazine. It's not turned off the TV. He's just sort of mixing his metaphors. So just in case you got confused. And he was so invested in this. He got Sports Illustrated for his bar mitzvah.
That's amazing.
Yes.
They try to make him a man.
Yeah, exactly.
I had Sports Illustrated subscription for like another 10, 12 years. I used to keep the old issues in a box. I mean, that's how much I enjoyed it. And then when they decided, it's important for us to feature Caitlyn Jenner on the cover, when Bruce Jenner had not been an actual athlete for 3 decades. And all of a sudden I'm reading about transgenderism in Sports Illustrated. I was like, okay, I'm done. I can't do this anymore because this has nothing to do with sports. And I subscribe to a sports magazine. I'm not doing this anymore. And the other is during the Kaepernick protest when it became...
I got a little math problem here. So his story is he got it. He was subscribing to it from when he got it for his bar mitzvah, and he subscribed to it for 10 to 12 years, he said, right? And so he's 36 now. That would put him, it was 25, so it was about 10 or 11 years ago. When did Caitlyn Jenner get on the cover? Do we know?
I believe that was 2016.
Well, that's
2016.
weird. That's only 4 years ago. So he had more or less stopped reading Sports Illustrated, but then stopped again because
also,
of
he
the
said
cover.
Nothing to do with sports, but like, do the swimsuit editions have anything to do with sports?
Well, that's, also, I'm sure he would quit it then too. Yeah,
it was a "Where Are They Now" issue. I mean, it's kind of relevant.
Yeah, that's relevant to it. It's also like, yes, I stopped reading because there was one cover I didn't like.
He was also Republican. Can we just remind everyone that?
Well, but Ben Shapiro has some other issues there. Right. But go ahead. Let's continue on.
I subscribe to a sports magazine. I'm not doing this anymore. And the other is during the Kaepernick protest when it became incumbent on people to somehow approve of the hands up, don't shoot symbology that was being put out by particular players. I'm tempted to do the same with the NBA now that you have LeBron James, who was willing to basically virtue signal on behalf of the communist Chinese government, but rip Drew Brees. It's getting to the point where I don't want to watch sports. My place.
Pause it for 1 second.
Of comfort.
Why did he rip? Why did? Yeah, he was drooling all over himself. Why did LeBron rip Drew Brees?
I don't understand this.
Matt, do you know?
Drew Brees last week was asked about kneeling teammates, and he gave this schlock about
my dad served in World War II.
Oh, so in other words, Drew Brees injected politics into sports, but it's only when LeBron responds to Drew Brees does he decide I'm not gonna get involved in sports anymore. Because
one was patriotism, Sam.
Yeah, that's not political.
It's not political when the white guy says something.
Preserving your freedom, right?
All right, let's continue. I just wanted to be clear on that. It was the idea that LeBron answered another sports figure who said something political that was making everything political.
Chinese government, but rip Drew Brees. It's getting to the point where I don't want to watch sports. My place of comfort has been removed from me, and it may not be restored until there are actual sports leagues that remove politics from the sports.
My place space of comfort.
Safe space.
I can't wait for Adam Carolla to slam this guy for being such a snowflake.
Oh my God.
I can't follow sports if someone puts out a magazine cover that I don't appreciate. Or I have to hear LeBron say something. I'm not gonna watch any more basketball this season. In fact, that's it. I'm done watching basketball this season. And baseball. What do you think about that? I've stopped. Do you think he even realizes that there's no sports teams playing anymore?
No, I don't think he has any idea.
Oh, that'd be hilarious.
Yeah, I stopped. Last week was the last time I was going to watch any sports.
It's like listening to Lindsey Graham talk about sports.
I don't know. Lindsey Graham could like sports. Ben Shapiro could like sports for all I know. But I mean, what a baby! What a baby! I don't have my safe space anymore. Drew Brees can say whatever he wants, but when LeBron starts to speak up, then we're getting political.
Mm-hmm.
What a baby! What a baby!
Is this? I can't tell if this is fake or not. This is on Goodreads. Say It So: Papa, Dad, Me, and the 2005 White Sox Championship Season by Ben Shapiro. 2000. Is that? Has
He
anybody
is a
heard
White
of this?
Sox fan.
Yeah.
Sounds like a literary hangover investigation.
Oh God.
Some of these folks on the right are losing it. Let's play one. We mentioned yesterday how the Fox and Friends people were really just getting crazy over this whole notion that there would be any type of serious reform to policing. And really, the only way there can be serious. I mean, look, we've tried the experiment, right? We had a 5-year experiment with the Minneapolis Police Department. And the reforms that were put out there by the Obama administration, they didn't work. Okay, they get credit for trying, but they didn't work. So everybody agrees there's a problem. And so what are you going to do about it? Here's Kilmeade. Brian Kilmeade, he's like, well, I mean, I'm going to acknowledge there's a problem, but I don't think we should do anything about it.
Can you believe they're putting a proposal to have community members attend domestic violence events? So if there's a problem with a man and a woman in a one of the most dangerous things that could happen, you go to a domestic incident, you talk to anyone in law enforcement, now you're going to send in a sociologist. By the way, has anyone asked the sociologists if they want to go to a domestic dispute? I'm pretty sure they don't. They also want to decriminalize sex work. All right, that'll help society. And mental health responders instead of armed police, and no more traffic stops. Unbelievable. At a time in which crime is going up.
Is he saying, like, I assume he's being facetious about decriminalizing sex work would be helpful to society, but I actually think he's right, just not in the ironic way. And then he just sort of races through and you're going to send professionals to deal with homelessness and traffic stuff. I mean,
God forbid you send people who are trained in this for years, decades in some cases, come and work with people directly.
Yeah, that would be that'll be good for society. Go ahead, continue.
Are you going to take away their guns too?
Health responders instead of armed police, and no more traffic stops. Unbelievable. At a time in which crime is going up in San Francisco, Minneapolis, and New York City, before these protests happened, before the tragic death of George Floyd, we're now looking at police departments and saying you're the problem. If you want to start a dialogue between them, I think that makes sense. If you want to capitalize on this stupidly and come up with proposals that any logical person would not sign on to, continue on this path.
This is crime has gone up. Let's just remind everybody, with exception to pretty much like 2 cities in America, these cities are the safest they've been in decades. It is like ticked like a little bit.
There's no, it's a dialogue. What's the dialogue going to lead to? Here is his partner, Ainsley Earhart, and she's got, this is really galaxy brain stuff, right? Isn't that what the kids would say with this? With Ainsley Earhart? This is galaxy brain stuff.
It's more like Ainsley Airhead.
You don't want to defund the cops, and here's why.
And by defunding the police department, it can hurt the minority community as well. If you look at the stats, the police department in New York, 53% minorities. If you look at the police department in Chicago, 51% minorities. In LA, it's 60%, Brian.
Yeah. That's
does
right.
that mean
You
there's
can't
no white
defund the
supremacy?
cops because you can't defund the cops because some minorities may lose their job as cops.
Yeah, not like we could replace those jobs somewhere else.
Right. It's not like the proposals aren't specifically calling to basically offer a lot of those people other jobs in the community at the same pay that they would all be willing to accept. But I love the idea that you can't defund the cops because then you're hurting minorities.
But isn't this like a defense in that it basically erases the white supremacy? Like 40% aren't white, and what percentage of that is what level of white supremacy is the cap?
I wonder if she would be okay with just like, okay, well, if that's the concern, then maybe what we should do is that only white cops get fired.
Yeah.
Is that what she's promoting?
I mean, that'd be a start.
That's pretty radical.
That might scare some people in this country.
I would like
to go on the Antifada.
I would say exactly. I would like to see someone put out a press release. Maybe Antifa should put out a press release congratulating Ainsley Earhart for coming out for the firing exclusively of white cops.
That logic though reminds me of something from the Obama Medium post, which is when he said like an older black woman was crying because her local grocery store was burnt down. And then he said like a grocery store might never be built in that community again, which is all true enough to say. But to say that as the former president of the United States, when you could have maybe done something to empower those communities economically so they could maybe build a grocery store if it got burnt down, like that we just naturalized the economic like
entrepreneurial zones.
Yeah.
Tax credits for people in those good communities.
He invested in charter schools. What are you guys talking about? That was...
entrepreneurial zones. We're going to have hot zones all over here.
Oh, my God.
Here's what's the best Tucker? We got a couple of clips from Tucker Carlson. Which one? I guess he's really off.
Yeah, he was really going in on it. I would say probably number 9 was my
Here is
favorite.
Tucker Carlson talking about how Democrats hate police because they don't control police departments. I'm not sure what he means by control because a lot of these cities are, in fact, the mayors are Democrats. But here, let's play this clip.
Well, as usual, the truth bears no resemblance whatsoever to what they're telling you. Think about it for just a second. Democratic politicians control the police.
Anybody else wondered, like we keep playing clips of Tucker Carlson, how's this guy getting so tan?
Yeah.
What does he do? Does he just sit out and get tan all day?
Well, he's at home, right?
I guess.
Home studio?
Maybe.
Looks like a little bit of tanning lotion.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's very
I don't think
odd.
they have hair and makeup right now, so that's his makeup. It's full-time makeup.
Okay, that works.
Sam, you should do it, Sam.
I'm on it. I'm gonna get some bronzer.
Democratic politicians control the police departments of virtually every big city in this country. Now they're telling you they want to get rid of those police departments. If they did, that would mean less power for themselves. So right away, you know there's lying going on. Democrats do not relinquish power voluntarily, ever, period. Republicans frequently do. Democrats never do. So that's the first thing to know. Something obviously is going on here beneath the surface. This has to be an attempt to increase the power of the Democratic Party because every policy they push is, always. And in fact, that's exactly what's happening here. Democrats have no intention of abolishing the police. Listen carefully and you will hear them admit that. Instead, they want to replace the police. Take the people who currently have badges, many of whom, by the way, voted for Donald Trump, and swap them out for new people, people who hate Donald Trump and hate the people who voted for Donald Trump. That's what's actually happening here. And it makes sense. Law enforcement is one of the very few institutions remaining in this country that the left does not yet control. Democrats hate the police because they don't control the police. Very simple. You remember 35 years ago when Democrats were constantly attacking the U.S. military?
Pause it for a second. I'm sorry. I'm confused.
He contradicted himself.
He starts off by saying they don't want to defund the police because they actually control the police. And then within 90 seconds, he says they don't control the police.
Right. And they hate it.
They want to replace them.
I mean, they should control the police if they are the mayor. They should have some control over the police departments. I don't think that's what he's getting at.
They control them theoretically in that they have power, but I think the individual officers, they don't control their minds.
I see.
Well, I also love that they're like, we don't relinquish control, Democrats.
Right.
Al Gore?
Like the way Al Gore just walked away from the exactly. That was the first thing that I thought was like, except for that whole presidential thing. Is there any more to his ranting and raving? Is he having a breakdown?
Yes. Yes and yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Play it.
Control the police. Very simple. You remember 35 years ago when Democrats were constantly attacking the U.S. military? We don't hear that anymore. Why is that? It's very simple. The left took over the Pentagon. No reason to attack people you control, which they do. And they plan to do the same thing to your local police department. Let's be clear. What Democrats are proposing isn't some form of radical libertarianism where the cops leave and citizens police their own neighborhoods. No, it's the opposite of that. What they're proposing is a power grab. Defund the police is a move toward authoritarian social control cloaked in the language of identity politics.
Oh.
What?
Identity politics.
Can any do we have like some type of decoder ring for this?
We need like a flow chart, basically, I think. Diagram it.
He needs to do what Glenn Beck used to do.
I think we need I think we need a toxicology report.
on you think is your theory that
it seems like he's
so high at night that he just comes in with these ideas and he's writing a script then?
There seems to be something going on with his chemical functioning.
There's Tucker Carlson basically just having an on-air nervous breakdown, just ranting about how by defunding the police, it's an authoritarian move.
But you see how he notices minorities at the end? He's like, it's all a front. Identity politics is a front for the takeover.
But I don't understand how you get. So what's the idea that we're going to have this? The left is going to the authoritarian left is going to take over with their brown shirts of social workers who are going to go in and counsel people to toe the line. Is that how it works?
Pull the guns out of all the officers' hands. We're gonna have communities of color just pull those guns out of their hands and take over with their social workers. That sounds great.
We're gonna dominate and be dictatorial with these after school programs for kids. Very strange. But Glenn Beck was mentioned, and folks ask, and so they shall receive. If you had any questions as to who was behind Black Lives Matter, well, Glenn Beck has figured it out. And of course, it is a move by the secular humanists, led by one of the greatest secular humanists in the world.
So how much do you want to make a bet that the final phase for the black community is happening now, trying to get blacks to separate from their church? What? That way you can move progressive policies forward and you can completely destroy these people.
What?
It's weird because blacks are so close to God.
Pause it for 1 second. We're going to start at the beginning of this, and I want people to listen to his language. Because basically what he's talking about, he's accusing Democrats of, at the very least, cultural genocide of black people. And so he, instead of saying the final solution, he uses another euphemism. And I would just listen to it in that light.
So how much do you want to make a bet that the final phase for the black community is happening now, trying to get blacks to separate from their church? That way you can move progressive policies forward and you can completely destroy these people. It's weird because blacks are so close to God, and yet God is not mentioned in a single page of Black Lives Matter's website. Gender shows up 4 times, sex 3 times, comrades shows up twice, but no mention of God. I'll tell you what this is. This is not a movement. This is a Soros operation. This is a way to get people to vote for Democrats for the next 200 years and to tear our nation apart.
Oh boy, where is the Samantha Bee and New York Magazine profile on this guy?
Yeah,
well,
I was going to say.
New York Times. Go ahead, Brennan. Oh.
I was just going to say this is what we call Glenn Beck is sorry about all that. Take 900 or whatever.
Yeah, there was some hubbub over the New York Times op-ed section this weekend. Here's a oldie but goodie. So
empathy for Black Lives Matter. Oh, that was almost 4 years ago.
Wow.
Unbelievable. Well, that's what
Before
happened.
the
To be
rebrand.
honest with you, everybody knows that Black Lives Matter existed, and then Soros slid in and took it over as part of a final phase of
he monopolizes
destroying black people.
This isn't even coded anymore.
No, it's not.
This is
I mean, it's
extraordinarily
not.
blatant.
Oh, Glenn Beck is sorry about all that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is that a future headline or is that just the past one? It's probably both, right?
It's evergreen.
Damn, that was only 3 weeks after you wrote this op-ed. Good. Good thing the New York Times is better.
What was his goal? Like, this was before he relaunched his show. I'm sorry, I'm not paying attention to the day-to-day.
Yeah, no, Glenn Beck, at different times, their business model falls apart. And he thought this was going to be, he thought that that Trump would lose, I think. And so he was betting on, like, I'm going to be a never-Trumper Republican. And then he realized there's no money in that. And so I've got to go back. And Trump has won. And my audience, I've, molded as too much of a bunch of lunatics, and that's it. End of story. There you go.
In this interview, he's asked if he supports Black Lives Matter. And they ask him to clarify his statement. And he says, what I am a supporter of is people I've met who say there's a real problem in our community and no one is listening to us. No follow-up question after that.
Right.
Yeah, he played it for headlines, yeah.
Who is this guy, Slow Crow? Do we know who he is?
As far as I can tell, he's a conservative TikTok icon.
And who is Ryan Fournier?
Oh.
It's not
he's the young Trump guy.
Yeah. It's sort of like a competition for Charlie Kirk. Is that what's basically going on?
Oh, yeah. I think so.
Okay. Ryan Fournier was promoting this guy on Twitter. And this is a TikTok guy who has a really interesting idea. Well, if you want to defund the police, then we will go on a crime spree in committing violence against you, just to show you how law and order is really important.
Yeah, so a lot of you dipshit damn penny-waste sons of bitches want to damn defund the damn police department. Well, I'll tell you what, we do better than that. Let's just do away with them altogether. Let's do a 1 month damn trial period. And let's let you deal with a bunch of redneck sons of bitches like me. Because I'm going to tell you something. People like me and my damn crowd, we don't own tasers, and we don't own rubber bullets, and we don't own damn all that penny waste shit. We just have real fucking guns that shoot real fucking bullets, and we have a real fucking attitude toward dipshits like you. So let's just do that 1 month damn trial period, and let's see how quick it takes for you to want that fucking police department to come back into the fucking picture.
So you should, let's see, get this. I want to just sort of map this out here. You should support the mechanism for law and order, because we are proud supporters of law and order. And in the event that you don't, and you want, because he's acknowledging like that, in the event that you want to reform policing in this country, what we would recommend is, in fact, you do away with all of it so that we can go on a crime spree and shoot you as a way of manifesting our sense of law and order.
These are like the guys who were rejected from the police department. They're like, you're just a little bit too white supremacist for us.
And
stay at
you know
home with
what-
your guns.
Exactly.
Militiamen.
But this is why the whole law and order thing is not going to work. In terms of like, this is why we're not going to see the dynamics. I mean, we already are starting with different dynamics on some level from like 1968 and the attempt of Nixon to do this. And we've talked a little bit about this in the past where it's, Nixon was not in power. Trump is. And so he's actually going to be judged upon the responses that he has, like we saw in that park in Washington. But the other thing is that they don't understand what Nixon's pitch was, return to sort of like calmness. And these guys are basically saying like, we're not, this is a civil war.
Right.
And so there is no promise of calmness. When Trump says you got to crack down, you need to pummel these people, that he's not selling calmness. And that is the problem, is that Trump is still, sort of like, he's just selling dystopia. He's saying like, this is a dystopia and we just need a different dystopia.
It's a real gamble, though, because at the end of the day, I think that will cost him the 5,000 votes he needs. I mean, what's being revealed is there are conservatives across this country who just are not into this, who are moving into the Black Lives Matter camp that we never thought in a million years would even shift. Let's not forget about the election. Yes, there were the Trumpsters, but so much of his base was upper middle class, like businessmen who hated Hillary.
Yep. And
that is enough. I mean, those people will not. They're not going to hang out with the militiamen. That's not their. This is not their audience. I mean, that crew, that solid base that he's banking on, is so far removed from the Colin Powell crowd, from the upper, not even Colin Powell, the Shark Tank kind of guys.
Right.
Who
Because they
did
already
vote
got
for
their
Trump.
tax cut. They got their tax
Exactly.
cuts. And they're like,
Exactly.
Joe Biden's not going to roll them back that much. It's always like this, 2 steps forward, 1 step back in terms of our taxes getting rolled back. And there it is.
Yep.
All right. Lastly, let's dip into this race in Massachusetts. Please don't break my heart. Please don't break my heart.
This is amazing.
There was a debate last night. Was it last night? Senator debate in Massachusetts for the primary. It's Massachusetts. The Democrat is going to win. Incumbent Ed Markey is debating Joe Kennedy III. And Markey basically says, you're a Pinot. Here we go.
Congressman Kennedy had a chance to sign on to Medicare for All when it was introduced. I stood with Bernie Sanders to fight for health care for everyone. Medicare for All. It took Congressman Kennedy 2 years to sign on to Medicare for All. That's not progressive leadership. Congressman Kennedy decided he was going to work for a right-wing Republican district attorney. That's not progressive leadership. Congressman Kennedy decided that he was going to vote to send military weapons to the local police in our country. That's not progressive leadership. Congressman Kennedy had a chance when he gave the State of the Union response to Donald Trump to talk about climate change. Congressman Kennedy did not mention the word climate change in his response. Congressman Kennedy is a progressive in name only. When he gets a chance to lead on Medicare for All, on climate change, on the militarization of the streets of this country, he was not a progressive leader. And when he had to make a decision as to who he was going to work for as a lawyer, he decided to work as a lawyer for a right-wing Republican. That is not the kind of progressive leadership which our country needs desperately right now.
I love it.
That was, well, first off, what he's saying is he's a Kennedy in name only.
Ooh, that's
right?
a better, yeah.
That's basically what he's saying. Now, he didn't go that far because he doesn't want to get, but that's the subtext of what he's saying. He has the name Kennedy, but he is not like the other Kennedys, because in Massachusetts,
right?
Just the name Kennedy is like worth like, I don't know, like 30% of the vote immediately on day one. And I also was struck. He could have said, you didn't vote for Medicare for all. I stand with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
Warren, I was surprised by
He
that.
could have said that, but
Yeah.
I wonder if his perception is that, like, if Warren has I wonder if that's an oversight or if that was a conscious decision to, like, I'm not going to, in this primary, it's not going to behoove me to be associated with Warren. I don't know. That just.
What are her negatives right now? Have you seen any of?
I haven't. I mean, everything I know is, anecdotal from Massachusetts. But look, people were, even in the primary, she didn't perform well in Massachusetts relative to Bernie Sanders.
Is there a poll out for this one yet? I mean, the race, it's not until what, August?
I feel like I had read about a poll a while back that showed that Kennedy was up.
Oh my God, this is painful.
But really ridiculous. I mean, really, just.
What is Schumer's perspective? I mean, like, have you heard anything about why they're essentially the establishment's allowing this to happen? Like, how much has Markey actually pissed off the establishment? Just that I think is what's so amazing to me is he's progressive, but he's not throwing flames.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, I think I don't know what the theory was behind this, but I do know that I would imagine because of the DCCC blacklist that anybody who works with Joe Kennedy, I imagine, is completely blacklisted for the future, right?
Sure.
Right? I mean, isn't that what we were told? You don't go after incumbents. And if you support a challenge to an incumbent, then you are blacklisted.
Right.
The average as of the beginning of May was at Kennedy +9.
Oh, my God.
Now, it's hard to know who's going to come out and vote, in this context. I mean, who knows?
It was in September, right? The primary?
September 1, yeah.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
We have Isan Lakey for filling Joe Kennedy's seat because it's opened up. Guys, check out Isan Lakey. She's an amazing candidate. She's an immigrant from Morocco and a matriarch candidate. Just as a side note.
The only thing I wonder is, at one point, did he think that, like, I don't know, Elizabeth Warren would be VP and he's just trying to get a, pole position for that. But who knows?
Sort of like the reverse of what happened in Arizona with McSally and Kirsten Sinema and then switched out.
I just, it would be a drag to lose Markey that would be a downgrade. Calling from a 323 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. This is Miles from California.
Miles in California. What's on your mind?
I guess I had two things. I don't know if you can take a comment and a question. But one was kind of to vent a little bit, if I can be honest, about Sanders and just, I don't know, man. It's just kind of heartbreaking watching the guy tweet now. He's almost like it's like watching, I don't know, like De Niro being old and Raging Bull. And it's like, everything he's talking about is so pertinent, but it just seems like him dropping out early just lost all the power and leverage to even, I don't know, to make anything come to fruition. And then I guess my question would be, looking at progressive leadership or progressive media moving forward, how can we best solidify progressive media so that candidates can benefit from it and we can utilize it to get them elected?
Good question. I appreciate the call. Let me, we'll take that. I mean, I know that there is, I'll take the first one, the second one first. There's attempts, people out there trying to sort of build progressive media. I think it's a very hard road to hoe. But, I happen to think that it'd be easier to do it via radio just because that's just an easier medium, I think, in some ways to put this out there. But I don't know, Nomi, what's your take on Sanders? Like in the alternate universe, he's still in the race. He's not winning and he's tweeting. And I don't know. I don't know if it made more sense for him to drop out then or now or what. I don't know. What's your sense?
I'm in the camp that he dropped out too early. It just didn't logically make sense. He had more leverage. If he really wanted to make about the convention, if that's the logic that they were using, he should have waited a little bit. It didn't seem very sensical. And I think the factions in the campaign and a lack of a lot of the previous institutional knowledge from 2016, this is something a lot of people don't know. A lot of people were missing from 2016 who, there were still some, but I just think probably also thought that it would have been smarter for him to stay longer, because at the end of the day, it came down to, in his mind, this is obviously before COVID really, I mean, it had taken place and the media had shifted away, but his whole rationale was he was going to reform the party or keep the reforms that we'd all fought for. That only happens if you stay in the race longer and get more delegates. So it really didn't make sense to me. In terms of like just seeing him tweet, we also, I mean, I'm sure you're seeing this in terms of progressive media, people are just worn out. They're exhausted. Yep. They are frustrated. And so much of the movement around Bernie Sanders is the conversation around Bernie Sanders. And if people just aren't tweeting as much, aren't watching as much media online, if they're checking out a little bit, maybe there's a little bit of an uptick right now with the uprising, then you're not hearing as much about Bernie Sanders. Yep. There was an article today, just today, about Bernie Sanders, you know, still fighting. Where is it? Hang on, I'll find it. Mike Casca tweeted it out. There's been a lot of news today from Sanders. Bernie Sanders is not done fighting. This is in the New Yorker. So, you know, normally that would become a huge news peg. Or all the endorsements he made today, most of them from New York. You know, I think that's the other thing. If he does want to be this force of power, this grandfather of the Senate, this, you know, grandfather of the movement, he, as a leader, as this tough criticism, has to endorse these candidates earlier. That's what power is. Not 2 weeks before their elections in New York, the machine in New York. Like, that's not going to shift anything.
Yeah, I agree about that last point. I mean, I think he could have stayed in longer, but I don't know that it would have done anything, frankly.
More delegates, I think.
Maybe. But I think like once COVID hit, you already had this sort of narrative of people just want normalcy. And there was already sort of like a building sense of like, we don't want, you know, because he wants to maximize, you know, both how many delegates I have and how much outside power I have. But with knowing that he's not going to be the nominee at that point, then you start going to like, okay, plan B. And on plan B, maybe I want more authority in the Senate than, you know, and maybe even just soft authority. Like, I don't want to be on the wrong side of a President Biden to start the administration off. You know, I want to wait and get some footing and then maybe start to get a little more aggressive and push in certain ways. I don't know. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different theories that you could apply.
But if he can influence the makeup of Congress, I mean, that was the movement side.
But that was a problem that they had. They had that problem during the campaign, too, it seemed to me.
During the campaign, yes. But in 2016, I mean, he went to immediately start Our Revolution, which is not the most perfect organization. It is not as... There's a lot of criticism of it. I think some of it's valid, some of it's not. It's a multi-city organization that's from the grassroots up that has worked very hard to organize, okay? Bernie distanced himself from it, I think, per advice of the same people who told him not to get in and endorse people early. Or, I mean, listen, I wasn't endorsed by Bernie Sanders. I'm just like, that just shows you there's a lot of disconnect in terms of the endorsement front, which is how you build that movement in Congress. If you want to be an effective senator, if you want to change the makeup of Congress, you got to endorse candidates so that they can win, so that the legislation you put forward makes a difference. It's not just about tagging your name on and sending an email at the end of their election so they can raise some money.
Right.
So,
you're not going to change. You know, I mean, you know, early
actually,
money.
Nabila's race is perfect. 400 votes. I mean, it's a runoff. His endorsement a week ago could make a difference in getting her into the runoff.
Right.
The closest district in the country last cycle.
Early money is like yeast, right? That's what Emily's list was all about. But that dynamic is the case, right? Early anything is like yeast.
Yeah.
Calling from a 919 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Omar from North Carolina. I really shouldn't be on the phone right now because I'm at work. But I just have a quick recommendation for something for you guys to debunk.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so Jimmy Dore about a month ago put out a video titled, I'd appreciate if someone wrote this down, it's titled, Bernie Sanders abandons Medicare for all as Trump adopts it. And when I saw that, it just made me realize that he's gone like full MAGA. He's gone full like smearing progressives, and it really pissed me off. And the like to dislike ratio is everyone likes it. Everyone thinks like Bernie is not a progressive and Trump is for Medicare for all now. So I'd appreciate if you guys debunk that.
Sure, I'll look into it. I mean, it's I wish I could say I was shocked, but all right, Omar, thanks for the call. Appreciate it. Get back to work.
We'll go down side to back. No,
gotta go.
Okay.
That's awesome.
You know, again, like there's some people out there who just like they're just trying to find their niche, and if it ends up being, like poor Michael Tracy has completely lost his mind again. I mean, I only mean again, but you know, I think it's just like a part of an ongoing process. People are trying, you know, look, there are times, and Nomi, I know you've experienced this too, I'm sure. There are times where the news is such, by the nature of like, you know, what battles are being waged, by the nature of like, you know, what's in session, what's not in session, and the cycle of different things. I mean, there's nothing, it's not fixed, but there's ebbs and flows where frankly, your voice is more or less relevant just because of your ideology and because of, you know, the perspective you take on in your theories of change and whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then there are some people out there who they don't want to be locked in by what they've said before or what their ideology is. They just need those clicks.
Right. Well, that's ultimately it. Is we were just saying about COVID and the business model, or what we were saying about Glenn Beck. I mean, they pivot abruptly because they want to keep those clicks coming in because of whatever reason. They're addicted to the clicks. They're addicted to the money. It's cash.
I mean, it's cash. It's, you know, I mean, you know, for instance, Tim Pool, I don't know if he believes anything that he says. I don't think he cares. Right. I think he just says, like, I found a recipe to do very little work and make a ton of money. And he does. He makes a ton of money on YouTube. And
well, it's sort of, I mean, all the criticism we have about MSNBC and corporate media, let's be very clear. If your coverage on the left in particular, if your coverage shifts because of the business model you're under, I mean, more or less you're going to have to adapt in some ways because you're using tools that respond certain ways, right? But if your editorial coverage shifts because of the money flow, you're just as guilty as MSNBC is in not covering Medicare for all because they take pharmaceutical money or health insurance ad money.
Absolutely. I mean, look, let's be honest. You know, for these shows, particularly ones that rely specifically on YouTube, people are very sensitive to clicks. And you get immediate feedback there. And also, you know, I think also some people are just like, I'm sorry, they're out of their minds. You know, like the idea that your politics will shift based upon who shows up on your show and accepts an invite to come on your show to talk, I think is just horrifying. It's juvenile. It's ridiculous. And it's absurd. You know, the idea that my assessment of any of Bernie or any politician whatsoever for coming on my show or not coming on my show would like be relevant to my assessment of them, I think is ludicrous. Like, you know, even when I was on radio, like that type of stuff is a huge tip off. And I remember Ed Schultz, who, you know, a lot of people like Ed. There was a lot of things that he said that were helpful to the union thing, but I don't think Ed's belief in this stuff was terribly deep, and I think he was in many respects, you know, driven by his ego, and I think he was, you know, there were elements of what he was doing that was just, you know, a function of him getting his 2 jets that he used to brag about. But I just remember early on. There was, and it's funny now to think about that he was getting uptight about this guy, that Olbermann had on Larry, I can't remember who the guy was. He's a former CIA guy. He had a blog called No Quarter, and he flamed out because he was convinced. He was very, very pro-Hillary in the 2008 primary, and he was convinced that there was a tape out there. Maybe people have heard this reference of the Whitey tape, that Michelle Obama was on tape saying Whitey, and this was going to drop. And I can't remember what his last name
was the controversy.
But back in the during the Valerie Plame thing, this guy Larry, and I can't remember his last name. And I think I had him on as a guest at one point. I don't know. The Ed threw this huge fit because he went on Keith Olbermann's show. And he was just enraged, I think publicly even, that he, Larry Johnson, I think it was, that he, that he was the first guest to have on. I mean, just like this type of stuff. Like, if you think this person's like a valid news source, then you isn't the idea that you want to amplify these people? Like,
right.
For me, I consider it a huge success if a guest that we have on this show ends up getting booked on cable television because of it. I mean, that to me is that's a huge percentage of why you do this, is right. It's like you're trying to amplify voices that that otherwise wouldn't be heard. And what better way for what we do, as a small platform that basically draws the attention of a bigger platform for people.
Well, then what I don't get though is when you have people like Michael Tracy, the Twitter warriors. They're, granted, if you operationalize it, you turn into an organization or something, there is monetary value there. But like Michael Tracy is not. He's just addicted to the tweets and being controversial. There's no. He doesn't have a YouTube channel as far as I know. And
I think he's got a Patreon. I don't know if he goes
he
on
does.
YouTube or what, but it's just for his writing or something. But yeah, no, I think he's just searching around for an angle. And I don't think he's a very good writer, but I think probably he, you do it long enough, you're going to be able to come up with a couple of decent stories. One would hope. But I'll look into that clip about Sanders abandoned Medicare for all, and Trump is supporting it. That didn't age well, but it has been almost 4 weeks, according to this guy. So, calling from 251 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Is this me?
It is you.
Awesome. My name's Philip. I'm from Mobile, Alabama.
Philip from Mobile, Alabama. What's on your mind, Philip?
All right, so I'm sure you guys have seen all the, videos of statues being torn down of Confederate and, colonial figures in history. And actually, in my hometown, the city took down the, I think his name is Colonel Sims. They took it down solely to protect it from defacement. And I got in an argument with some of my conservative friends about, they're saying, that it doesn't solve anything or it erases history. So I just want to get y'all's take on, response to people who say stuff like that.
Well, well, go ahead, Nomi, you start. Appreciate the call. We'll answer. We'll let you go. Okay.
All right.
Meaning the takedown of
these Confederacy statues and monuments.
Why are we honoring people who are on the wrong side of history? What countries do that? I mean, seriously, I'm not. Why?
Yeah. It's myth, not history. Is the simple answer.
That's exactly it. Oh, if you want to discuss it. Okay, sure, put it in a museum around a discussion about how these people are on the wrong side of history. But it shouldn't be a central part of a city that lost.
That's there's not a lot to add. That's not denying history. It is, history is something that you can get in history books. It is not, to make a monument of someone is not a value neutral exercise. right? Like we do not. Why don't we have a Hitler monument? That was a big part of history.
In Europe.
Where is our Mussolini monument? Where's our Emperor Hirohito monument? I mean, these were big figures, and they didn't win the war.
Mm-hmm. And they were from the same areas.
They represent, people's culture at one point.
The Italians don't honor Mussolini. We shouldn't be honoring, even if you're from the South. If that's the logic they're going by, well, they're from the South. We have to honor them. No.
We don't live by the rules of the Confederacy. They lost. I mean, part of the problem is, frankly, that there was not enough. We just didn't go far enough in Reconstruction. I mean, it's the mess. Yeah. And all of these statues, incidentally, were put up for the most part. I don't know for sure about that one. I don't know exactly what it is, but it was during a time, literally, of the resurgence of the KKK, and it was a function of that ideology at the time. It wasn't even a function of the commemorating war dead. And if you want to commemorate war dead, then do like a commemoration to the war dead. You can do that. That's fine. Put a little memorial. These people died. You don't champion the cause, because the cause was ultimately, we want to maintain our way of life, which was, of course, one which involved very intimately the subjugation of human beings and turning them into chattel.
Now, here's another question. Someone posed recently. I have family in Virginia who I'm not on the same side of politics with at all. I'll leave it at that. But I go down there every once in a while, and I went to an event, and it was at a former plantation. It was a converted plantation, and there was memorabilia on the wall. Some of it was, fine, just like old pictures of the plantation. But it ignited a conversation around repurposing plantations. And what is your theory on that? Because I guess this is a new area of debate.
I think it's a little bit gruesome. I mean, I think it's probably how you really present that paraphernalia in there. But I don't know. I think it's a little creepy.
If you have an all-white wedding party, I think they might not have a bigger problem with it. But I mean, what if you don't?
Right.
You're going to a slave plantation. I think you can't do events there. Is what I mean. That'd be my rule.
Like if you let's say, what if? I mean, I don't want to use a concentration camp, a death camp, as an example in Germany, but I think it would be a little bit creepy if that was like a resort place, or even like an internment camp for Japanese in this country. I mean, there was, these things existed. There were ongoing atrocities there. And, I don't know that you need to necessarily, knock down the buildings and this and that, but to sort of make it like it's an old style plantation. I don't know. Those are really, old style work camps with just really nice accommodations for the commandant. That's really what it sort of feels like. I don't know.
It's really common. I was shocked to see. Actually, I just remembered in Puerto Rico, I went to a converted. They turned it into not a vineyard, distillery, and it was a plantation in Puerto Rico. It was a former sugarcane plantation. So
I mean, you turn it into you don't honor its past. I think in some level, or at the very least, you say hey, this is the room where people were lashed and whipped. Enjoy your, your complimentary
brunch
breakfast.
Apropos brunch.
Calling from a 716 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Buffalo.
Hi. Yep. This is Amber from Buffalo.
Whoa. Okay, Amber, you got to back off your phone just a little bit if you could.
Oh, this always happens. Sorry. Okay. How's that?
That's great.
Okay. Good. Yeah. Everything's ridiculous here. When you were talking about the conspiracies, I just figured I'd let you guys know that there's also most of what I kept seeing was there's conspiracy that he wasn't really bleeding. He intentionally fell, and he had a blood pack with a line that focused on a wrinkle in the back of his shirt and the strap of a bag on him up through his mask, and say that it's going on the line alongside his mask line, and that's where the blood came from.
Well, Amber,
it was coming from his ear.
You got to hand it to the Buffalo police, because they could have really embarrassed him by holding that up at a press conference when they took him out of there, but they didn't, because they wanted to protect. They've
shown a lot of respect for him.
They've shown a lot of respect, or maybe they themselves are being paid by Soros to hide the blood pack.
Isn't he at the hospital
Probably.
right now?
It would be news to the union president, who said wonderful things about the situation.
Wow.
Wait,
and what? Go ahead.
Isn't he at the hospital though right now? Sorry to have to prove this, but
yeah, he's still in the hospital. I think they said as of this morning, I saw that he's not in the ICU anymore, but they still keep saying that he's in stable but serious condition.
Man.
What else can you tell us?
And I was going to tell you, he also he has pancreatic cancer.
Oh.
If you see pictures from him a while ago, it looks like he's lost a lot of weight. And I'm like, we have one trauma center here. I don't know at the moment how much we've got the COVID people going there. I know we've got a separate COVID facility, but like, it's not a great situation for a 75-year-old man with pancreatic cancer to be in at the moment.
Oh, horrible.
I was going to say and let people, I don't want to be like taking advantage of that, and I'm not affiliated with the campaign, but I thought I'd let people know about Adam Bojack. He's running for New York Assembly 149. He is actually friends with Martin Gugino. He's at bojackfornewyork.com, or it's without a C, BOJAK, 4 spelled out, NY.com. He's endorsed by Citizens Action New York and DSA and other people that I don't remember at the moment. He's a tenants' rights attorney. He's good beans, and we need good beans.
Who has that seat right now? Sorry.
It's going to be open. The guy in it is running for a state Senate seat, I believe. He's running against a former cop and the son of a former cop who's currently on the council. The city council, and on the morning of the day that Martin Gugino was shoved, they voted to put forward the budget as is, with like $143 million for the police department and like $4 million for all of the community services. So,
oh my God,
Amber, appreciate the call.
Yep, take care.
Bye. We got to get going, folks. There's no time for more calls. Apologies. But one thing, Nomi, before we go, that I think has been very helpful. I think there has been a lot more attention focused on just how much of our city budgets go to the police. I don't think most people, I certainly wasn't as conscious. I mean, I remember somebody saying like they want, maybe it was Vitaly's piece in The Guardian saying $45 million cut from the Minneapolis Police Department, or activists were calling for that or something to that effect. And I was like, I wonder how big their budget, and it's amazing how much of city budgets go to police departments. It's really stunning.
And how much of it, aside from the weaponry, the brutal weaponry, that's not even, much of it is not even, you can't even use it in wars, but how much of it is going to settle cases of police brutality?
Yep.
That is the bonkers, like, it's a slush fund, essentially.
Nomi, folks should check out your show. I know that you feel that way,
yes.
But I also feel that way, too. It sounds like you got a killer one this week. Folks can find it at the Nomi Keys Show on all YouTube and Patreon.com now.
Yes. Patreon.com, YouTube, all the places.
Thanks so much. Guys,
you.
Appreciate it. And we will see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know